My name is Dan Dick. I'm Director of Connectional Ministries serving in the Wisconsin Annual Conference, and I want to welcome you. And delighted you're here. Pastor Chris Bethke from the Wellspring United Methodist Church is here. We want to give you our thanks for hosting us and for your hospitality. It's wonderful to be here. This is where my wife Barbara and I attend, so this is home turf. This feels very comfortable and familiar, and we are delighted that you took this time to be with us today, because this is an opportunity for us to truly take some time to celebrate who we are and what we do as United Methodists. Too often in our United Methodist Church, we get caught in the spiral of worrying about what we don't have and what we don't get and what we're not doing, and there's a negative energy that kind of makes it hard for us sometimes to feel good about who we are. And so the intent of this day is not to worry about what we don't have and what we can't do, but instead to really take some time to look at what we are doing globally, denominationally, and in the Wisconsin Annual Conference. And so we're glad that you're here to hear some good news. It is my honor and pleasure to be able to travel around the state and do this with Ken Sloane from the General Board of Discipleship. He serves currently as the Director of Stewardship Ministries, and he's also the coordinator and liaison with connectional people in my position, Directors of Connectional Ministry all across the denomination. Ken and I go back a little bit. First of all, you need to know we're both Jersey boys. I came out of the Northern New Jersey Annual Conference, and Ken came out of the Southern New Jersey Annual Conference. I have always taken it a little personally that as soon as I left the Northern New Jersey Annual Conference, it became the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference. And so we both have that in our background. Ken was a Director of Connectional Ministries for 6 years, 7 years? 5 years. I knew it was inflation, you know. But he was a Director of Connectional Ministries at the time that I was in Nashville as a Director of Stewardship Ministries. So now he's Director of Stewardship Ministries. I'm a Director of Connectional Ministries. Eventually we'll compare notes and see, who did better. So it's great to have Ken with us to do that. He's been with United Methodist Communications, General Board of Discipleship. He's been fixing the church at the national level for years now, and we're delighted that he's here with us. I want to begin with a word of prayer and then set a very brief devotional frame from Scripture for our time together this afternoon. So let us pray. Gracious and loving God, indeed we are blessed. We have received so very much. And from what we have received, we give. We give to honor and glorify you. We give to serve and to help neighbor and community. We give in order to grow in our discipleship to become the people you need us to be. Indeed, it is you that does great work in the world, but you work through us, through our gifts, through our offerings, through our skills and knowledge, our passions and experience. You bring us together to become the body of Christ for the world. What a privilege and an honor that is. Lord, it is all too easy to get focused on what needs to be done. But in order to have the energy to keep working on the needs, we sometimes need to step back and appreciate all that has already been done. Lord, this is a time for us to reflect on lives that have been changed, indeed lives that have been saved, on hope that is being given, on help that is being offered, on ways that we, as we grow in our discipleship, serve and give and live together in ways that transform the world. Thank you for this time. We ask your blessing as we share it together. In Jesus' name, amen. The passage of Scripture I want to lift up to you comes from the second letter to the Corinthians in the 8th chapter. Various verses from this. Paul is writing to a church to really help them. They're going through some ups and downs. They've had some good times. They've hit some rough times. And Paul writes these words of encouragement. We want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace of God that has been granted to the churches of Macedonia. For during a severe ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For, as I can testify, they voluntarily gave according to their means, and even beyond their means, begging us earnestly for the privilege of sharing in this ministry to the saints, and this not merely as we expected. They gave themselves first to the Lord, and by the will of God to us, so that we might urge Titus that as he had already made a beginning, so he should also complete this generous undertaking among you. Now, as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in utmost eagerness, and in our love for you, so we want you to excel also in this generous undertaking. I do not say this as a command, but I am testing the genuineness of your love against the earnestness of others. For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. And in this matter, I'm giving my advice. It is appropriate for you who began last year not only to do something, but even to desire to do something. Now, finish doing it, so that your eagerness may be matched by completing it according to your means. For if the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Hear that again. For if the eagerness, the desire, the intent is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. I've worked in stewardship for 30 plus years now, and the one thing that still kind of confuses me, boggles my mind, is how often we define stewardship in terms of trying to get what we don't have. The definition of stewardship is not about managing what we don't have. It's about managing wisely and well what we do have, maximizing the potential of the gifts and resources that are within our control. And so this whole focus in on what we don't have, what we lack, what we can't do, that really expends an awful lot of valuable energy that could be better used in figuring out, well, this is what we have. This is what we've been given. These are the blessings that we work with. Now, how do we make sure that we use them in the best possible way so that they do the most good? And that's why we're here today. What is being done with the resources in the United Methodist Church is making such a huge difference. And all too often, we don't hear that story. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about the 85% that we do get because we're too busy talking about the 15% we don't get. So forget about the 15% today. Today we're going to talk about how United Methodist giving is truly making an impact and changing the world. And we're going to start by welcoming Ken Sloane to join us and to look at the global and denominational giving in the church.
Ceremonial transfer of the microphones here. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I've had a wonderful, wonderful time of traveling. Let me sure it's turned on here. Hold a second. Okay, there we go. I had a wonderful time traveling across your beautiful state. Had a marvelous trip 2 days ago from Appleton to Pine Lake Camp for the stewardship retreat. I followed my GPS, which, sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But I have to tell you that my GPS took me on roads that I wouldn't even have known they were roads. In fact, I told people when I got to the camp, in the last 30 minutes, I hadn't seen another car in that part of the trip. I saw some mobile farm equipment. I think I drove through some people's backyards in the process. But it was just a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful drive. And God's blessed me because we've just had the most beautiful days and cool and wonderful days to travel. So I'm thrilled to be here with you. I'm thrilled to work with Dan and to share some of these stories. And Dan and I both are on the same page about stewardship. The works and the writings that Dan did on stewardship when he was part of the Board of Discipleship continue to be some of the stuff that people seek after all the time. And some of the pieces are out of print, and we're trying to get them back into print so people can get them, because it really is some of the best insightful work that's come out of the Board of Discipleship in the area of stewardship. But today I'd really like to kind of focus a little bit on this idea of telling our story, and Dan has kind of touched on it. Because more and more as I live into this connectional world that we're in, and I find these stories and I tell people these stories, I find that attitudes change. People's eyes light up and they begin to say, well, that's what this is all about. Before I get into that too much, I do want to ask you to do something for me. I don't print out handouts of my slides. I find that a lot of people sometimes like to have them because there's information and figures and statistics that are connected to those slides. But one of the things that they asked me to do at the Board of Discipleship is collect people's email addresses. And if you would take a minute to include your email address on this little pad that I'm going to pass around, you don't have to put your mailing address. If you put your name and your email address, your zip code, and there's a spot there to say if you'd like to be added to the mailing list of GBOD, and if you click no, we won't. But if you can do that, what I will do is when I get back next week into the office, I'll get all these email addresses and I'll send you some handouts of my notes. So if you hear something that you want to remember, whatever, and it's up on the slide, know that those handouts will come to you and you'll be able to get those. The purpose of my presentation and my speaking really break down into a couple of things. The main thing really is to have a little bit of an opportunity to share some of the stories with folks about how our connectional giving makes a difference. And as Dan said, we just more and more are finding out that it's not the numbers and the statistics that move people to this, it's the stories that move people and that people want to connect with. And so I'll share some of those with you. I assume that when I go to talk to in places, usually the folks I'm talking to are leaders in the church. They're in some kind of leadership role. If you're going to take time on a Saturday afternoon, on a beautiful Saturday afternoon to come and hear this, you have some role in the church. You've kind of been called where people may come up to you and ask you, why do we as United Methodists do this? What is all this connectional apportionment stuff about, and what's the rationale for that? And I have some things that I kind of use as a foundation for why I think this way that we as United Methodists organize ourselves is a good way to do that. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those foundations. We won't have a whole lot of time to talk about what the individual funds are and the special Sundays and whatever, but we'll touch upon those as we talk. I'll share a little bit with you, hopefully at the end, about some of the places where you can find resources and find stories. If you had an opportunity when you came in to pick up one of the handbooks, I always like to give those out to folks, and Dan's got some more. We've got plenty of them. But to remind folks, I used to tell people, that you can order those for your local church and they're free and the shipping's free. And I really realized it really wasn't 100% correct to say that. So I say, you can order those for your church and they will be shipped to you at no additional cost because you paid for them already. They're really not free. You paid for them through your World Service apportionment. But it's one of the tools we use for people to understand how they're making a difference. And finally, I'm going to challenge you to be storytellers. We need more storytellers. We need people who are willing to share with folks within the local churches about what they do and how they give is making a difference. So I always start by, I think foundationally, is looking at Jesus' ministry. And certainly Jesus had all the gifts that he needed to be a lone ranger in ministry. He could have gone off on his own. Jesus chose instead to be in ministry and community. Sometimes we wonder about that. Sometimes we wonder about the people that he called, invited to be in ministry with him. But in that mix of all those different types, There was something that happened in their ministry. There was a chemistry. There was an effectiveness. Their ministry model was to pool resources for the betterment of the whole ministry. And I think that's important for us to see. I also think it's important for us to remember that when Jesus was preaching by the Sea of Galilee on that hillside, and there were folks who were coming, a crowd was gathering, thousands of people were coming to hear Jesus. And we know that Jesus was preaching this amazing message to people that just was drawing people like moths to a flame. And things were going great, and he was right in the midst of his game. But what you may not know, and you may not find in the commentaries, is that in the midst of those disciples, there was a small subgroup that was the finance committee. And the finance committee was looking at the crowd, and they were looking at their budget for hospitality, and they were looking at the crowd, and they were beginning to wring their hands, and they were a little nervous. And so what they actually do is, believe it or not, is they went up to Jesus in the midst of this, him being in this preaching groove or whatever, and they stopped Jesus. And they say, Jesus, you are doing great. You're at the top of your game. It's a wonderful message. Everything's going good. But it's getting late and it's a big crowd. And, if they stay any longer, they're not going to be able to get anywhere where they can get something to eat. And, Jesus, we really don't have the budget for this. We just don't have enough. And I think Jesus, and I think, Dan touched on this with his insight. Jesus says to them, all I'm hearing about is what you don't have. I think he's struck by that kind of scarcity mindset that they've gotten themselves in, and he says, you've told me what you don't have, tell me what you do have. And they say, well, what do we have? We've got this kid, and he's got some loaves and some fish, but Jesus, what is that for all these people? And Jesus basically says to them, it's not about what you don't have. Take what you have, put it in my hands, and see what I can do with it. And you know how the story ends. The story ends with, what do you do with all those leftovers? Baskets and baskets full of leftovers. That's the abundance that happens in Christ. When we offer what we have, not what we don't have, but what we have. And I reflect on this sometimes in terms of the United Methodist Church and our structure, and how we have small churches and medium-sized churches and large churches, and we don't ask the small churches to do the same that the large churches do. But we ask folks, we try to come up with a way to say, we believe this is something you can do. And this, not what you don't have, but what you do have, and make it available. And we know, and I know, and Dan knows, we know that's a struggle sometimes. We try to every conference tries to come up with a way to find a fair way to set a goal for churches to do 100% of their part in supporting this ministry that we do here in Wisconsin and all around the world. And if small churches decided, well, if we don't pay, nobody's going to notice that. But if the big churches stop, they'll notice it. But they won't notice it if we don't. If that happened across the denomination, all of our ministries would come to a grinding halt. The missionaries that we have out in the field, the educational programs that we have, our seminaries and universities would be in crisis, because we're all asked to do what we can. I also lift that similar example to what Dan shared in the devotion this morning. In Romans, Paul reflects again on those Macedonians. And what Paul reminds us is when he appealed to the Macedonians to help the church of Jerusalem that was struggling, Macedonians, they could have said, oh gosh, it's another appeal, another insert in the bulletin, another envelope we have to fill. It was something last year, now it's this year. They could have whined and groaned and moaned about it, but they didn't. They were joyful about the opportunity to give, because they thought it was an honor to be connected to that church in Jerusalem. They had been on the receiving end of so many blessings out of that church of Jerusalem, and they were honored to be able to help. I had the opportunity, about 3 years ago, to travel with a group of people from our finance agency, GCFA, to do training with financial leaders in the Philippines. It was an experience that changed my life. For years, we've looked at the Philippines as a mission field, and our board has sent money there through our giving, through your church's giving, and their generous giving through the World Service Fund, to develop churches in the Philippines. And the church in the Philippines is growing like crazy, like it is in Africa. And while we were in the Philippines, we were in Manila, They took us to an area down by the docks in Manila, which is really where the poorest of the poor gather. People who go to that area and they kind of squat and they live in old containers and shelters that they pull together and from pallets and pieces of corrugated metal and in the most unbelievable poverty that you can imagine. And thousands of people are there, gathered there in the poor. But it's in the midst of that community, we were starting a new United Methodist congregation. Through what you give to the World Service Fund that goes to the Board of Global Ministries, we were starting a new congregation. And we met the young pastor there. His name was Pastor Juan. He was about 27 at the time, had just graduated from seminary. And this young pastor had moved with his family to live in this community with these people, to be their pastor. And as we walked, and we kind of took us on a tour of to see where these people live and how they lived, people came out of these homes that they had to greet Pastor Juan with smiles and to greet him because he was there to help them and to help them with their families and their children. And he told us a story which I'll never forget. He had been ordained, and a person on the board of ministry, an older person on the board of ministry, had taken this young man aside and said to him, "You're ordained now. You can ask for a better appointment than this." And Pastor Juan said to him, "I don't need another appointment. This is where God's called me to be in ministry." When I came back from that trip, that image was so burned into me that it just renewed me in my ministry. And I said, all of those years that the church has invested in hoping that the Holy Spirit would ignite in the Philippines, the church would grow. And now we come back so blessed, more blessed in what we heard than anything we taught people there in the Philippines. And the whole group felt that same way. We were just recharged for ministry. And so those blessings, those arrows go two ways because those blessings work in two ways. We also, of course, have to talk about Wesley and how he shapes the foundation for who we are and how we give. Wesley said, and you all have heard this before, earn all you can, save all you can, so you can give all you can. I don't think Wesley was talking about us building big portfolios for ourselves. I think what Wesley had in mind was that we be industrious, we work hard. Remember, he said, in those questions, never trifle away your time. It's one of the questions we ask for people who are being ordained. Work hard, be industrious, be frugal. Save as much as you can. Live within your means. Be frugal. And the purpose of that is to be generous so that we can be giving to others and we can give. Wesley modeled that in the life that he lived. He lived a very modest life. Wesley was wealthy for his time. His writings brought him lots of money, but he didn't live like a wealthy person in his time. He lived modestly, and he did that so that he could take the assets he had and put them back into ministry. He said there's no holiness but social holiness. We focus so often on Wesley's personal piety, on his prayer life, how he got up so early in the morning, every morning, to be in prayer with God. But he also understood that his relationship with God couldn't be separated from how he connected with the world around him and what the needs are. It was very real to him in terms of his relationship with God was, how am I responding to the people around me? Families that were devastated by alcohol, children who were working in factories, people who had no access to any kind of decent health care. And so Wesley modeled that kind of living for us. When the class meetings met, you all know about our class meeting birth, our structure, our accountability groups. At the heart of those meetings was an offering taken for mission. And that's how we started. That's at the very beginning of our creation. And that practice, that centrality of mission, continued as the church came to the U.S. and as we've taken it to other places, because it's part of who we are. I live in Nashville. I work at the Board of Discipleship, but as Dan has said, I'm from New Jersey. I'm still a member of the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference, and I served 3 churches over the 22 years I was in ministry. And the last church, the longest appointment I had was the new church start. We met in school for 10 years, and then we finally built a building, and I got to be in there with them for a couple of years before I moved to my next appointment. But in that congregation, I had the blessing of having a lot of people come and join that church who had no other connection with churches, and a lot of folks who had no connection with the United Methodist Church. And folks would ask me about this whole thing of connectional, what it means to be a connectional church. And so I would explain it to folks like this, and I share this with you because it may be helpful when you have the question or the opportunity to share about being connectional with someone. And I would say to them, I said, you know about the Jackson Church. You know who we are. You know that we, gather in the school on Sunday morning. We have worship and we have Sunday school and we do activities. But it's more than just us getting together and doing activities. We get involved in the community, and we're involved in cooperative things, in food banks and in clothing drives and in habitat builds and all those different ways we can be involved in making our community better and strengthening the fabric of our community. But the Jackson Church isn't just any church. It's a United Methodist Church. And because we're a United Methodist Church, we have our ministry here in Jackson, but there are other United Methodist churches around us, and we have a connection to those churches as well. We have our ministry in Jackson, but there's a little bit of it that we share with all those other churches. It's called a district. In our case, it was the Northern Shore District. And on that district, we had people who needed worship in languages other than English, actually in Spanish, Korean, and French Creole, because we had a large Haitian community. But that was a lot for those individual churches to take on the responsibility of adding staff who could do worship in different languages. And so, as a district, we would do that together. We would share in that responsibility for saying that people had worship in a language that they understood. But our district wasn't all by itself, because our district was connected to other districts to make the annual conference, the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference. And so we had our ministry in Jackson. Excuse me. We had our ministry in Jackson. We had a little bit we shared with the district, but we had a little bit of it that we shared with the annual conference. Now, in our annual conference, we had great diversity. We had great ethnic diversity. On any given Sunday in New Jersey, you can have worship in 22 different languages, including Arabic. I think we may be the only conference. I think there may be others now. I used to say we were the only conference that had an Arabic-speaking United Methodist Church. But 22 different languages. But just like we had ethnic diversity, we had economic diversity. We had a community, and this was true when I was there, we had the community that had the lowest per capita income in the country. And we also had the community that had the highest per capita income in the country. And so we had needs, urban centers that we needed to do specialized ministry that we could only do if we worked together. And so the Jackson Church, we had our ministry, we had the part for the district, we had the part for the conference, but our conference was connected to other conferences to make a jurisdiction, the Northeast jurisdiction. And across the Northeast jurisdiction, we had some of the most dramatic urban ministry needs of any part of the country. From Boston down to Washington, D.C., place and place again, where we needed to be creative in finding ways that we could continue to sustain ministry in urban settings. And so we worked together as a jurisdiction, but even that wasn't the end, because our jurisdiction was connected to your jurisdiction and the other jurisdictions. But it doesn't stop there, because we also have central conferences in the United Methodist in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Philippines. And so what's so amazing is that this church in Jackson had our ministry. We had a little bit we shared with the district, a little bit with the conference, a little bit with the jurisdiction, but we also had a ministry that went all around the world to touch people in some of the farthest parts of the globe. And all that was the scope of that church's ministry. That was theirs. They had a part in that. But I would say to them, this really is not the best picture about what makes that kind of a connectional church happen, because it really happens in a local church. It happens in the Jackson United Methodist Church, and it happens in your local church, because people come together and they believe that this way of being in ministry is a good way to be in ministry. It's because we buy into that idea that there are things that are worth doing that no one church could do alone, but together we can. Together we can make these things happen. And so here's the image of our church. It's individual local churches taking care of their ministry to the community. That's their primary community. That's where the majority of their resources stay, doing ministry in that local community, being the church's outpost there, but also sharing a little bit in all different places around them so that their ministry can have the kind of reach that reaches the farthest corners of the world. That's who we are. That's our DNA. And I tell people all the time that you could have a church, I guess, that really doesn't care about what happens on the other side of the world, or what happens in the Philippines, or what happens in Africa. And I suppose we could have churches that really didn't care what happens outside their walls. And they can call themselves a church, but they really can't call themselves a United Methodist Church. Because when you put that cross and flame out in front, it says that you're connected to this ministry that connects to churches all around you and across the conference and around the world. And that's who we are. This picture is Kathy Gilbert. Kathy Gilbert is a friend of mine and a former colleague at United Methodist Communications. She's one of the news writers at UMCOM. She's written stories. If you read the Interpreter, you no doubt have read stories that Kathy has written. She went on a trip. She's from Louisiana. She went on a trip to Liberia, probably about 8 years ago now. And she came back and she told us an amazing story. And we first said to her, we needed to make an audio recording of that story because it was so moving. And she recorded an audio recording of it. And then after she had done that, and we were so moved by the story, we said, there's got to be some pictures around we can put to that. And they had some still pictures, and we were able to kind of put this together. But I'd like to share this little video because I feel it's such an amazing story.
Right at the time that Hurricane Katrina hit the coast of Louisiana, I was in Monrovia, Liberia, gathering some stories for United Methodist Communications and the Board of Pensions. We had been going around to people's houses and just seeing how destitute they were, and they were talking about just $20 would make such a difference in their lives. It would buy them food for a month and their families. So it was a very heart-rending time for me to see these people and knowing that they were pastors of the Methodist Church and they were just not really getting anything for all their years of service. And so as part of that trip, we went to Reeves Memorial at United Methodist Church, which was just a little small church out in the countryside. And a few days before we went, the pastor had asked us just to write a little bio, each of us, about who we were. And I just put in mind that I was a native of Louisiana. And so the Sunday came around and we were there. I was busy taking pictures, doing the reporter thing, listening, getting quotes. And at one point in the service, the pastor said, well, we have some special guests with us. And we were kind of expecting that to happen. And he says each of our names, but he leaves my name off the list. And the other people that I was with were like, oh, wait, you forgot somebody. And he said, oh, no, I didn't forget Kathy. I need Kathy to come up here. We have a special presentation for her. And so I didn't know what to expect, and I was just shocked that they would have anything for me, not knowing me. So I went up to the front, and he called all the children of the church up to the front, and there were like 30 little toddlers. And he said, as you can see, our congregation is mostly children, and a lot of them are orphans of war or parents died of AIDS. But they've been watching the news like everybody else, and they know that Hurricane Katrina has hit in your home state, and they've taken up a donation that they want you to bring back to the children of Louisiana. And so they handed me this wrinkled bulletin, and they'd written on the top of it, this is for the children of Louisiana. We give this in solidarity of their plight in the wake of the destruction of Hurricane Katrina. And it was a $20 bill, and I just thought how much that meant to them, how they were all living in poverty, but they just put their little pennies together and came up with enough, and they cared enough that they wanted the children back in Louisiana to know that they cared. And so I brought that gift back, and I gave it to the Bishop of Louisiana, Bishop Hutchinson, and it touched his heart, and it's touched the hearts of anybody who's heard that story. And I'm not sure where that $20 ended up, but I know that it did some good.
Those kids understood. I mean, I've talked to a lot of adults who never quite grasped the idea of what it means to be a connection, but these kids understood what it meant to be connected in this network of what our church is, maybe because some of them had lost their families, and for them, the church was their family. They didn't know about the socioeconomic differences between Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, first world and third world or whatever. All they knew was that there were children in Louisiana who were hurting, and they wanted to do something about it. It's a great example to me of what it means to be connected. Connected. It's not a one-way trip. It's a two-way journey where blessings flow back and forth. Let's talk a little bit about this church that your church is connected to and who we all are. I have people all the time who I hear them say, United Methodists are losing members. And I stop them, I say, that's not correct. The United Methodist Church is growing. The U.S. churches are losing members. But the United Methodist Church is growing because we're a global church. We have over 12 million professing members now. We have more than 41,000 local churches, more than 3 million baptized members, if you look at our numbers globally. If you want to know where we are in ministry, where your church is in ministry, your local church, when they participate in this connection, they are involved in ministry in over 125 countries with over 800 mission personnel who serve on the ground in 65 countries. Additionally, in ministries that we support through volunteers and mission and people who give up their vacation time and sometimes take time off from work without pay so they can be very real missionaries moving in places to go and to make a difference. Places like the Gulf, places now like New Jersey after Sandy that's still in the midst of having volunteer and mission teams come and do recovery work. Through United Methodist related community centers and through more than 2,000 advanced projects being a way that we as United Methodists have the opportunity to be directly in mission in a particular place with a particular group of people without having to get a passport or get the shots or buy a plane ticket. It's a way that 100% of our dollars can go and take a project, or we can take a project and do that project with our dollars through the supervision of the advance, which is funded through our World Service Giving. So then if you look at the 5 jurisdictions, we haven't been able to pull this information together. We're working on pulling it together for the central conferences, the global church as well. But in the 5 jurisdictions in the U.S., you're also going to find retirement homes and long-term care facilities, hospital and healthcare facilities, ministries with children and youth and people with disabilities, 113 colleges, universities, and seminaries, and day-to-day ministry in more than 26,000 pastoral charges. That's how your church, your local church, is connected in this network that is the Global United Methodist Church. Now, as Dan says, we have a tendency, I think, way too often, and I don't exclude myself from this, to focus on the things that we didn't get. You know, the family, the pledge cards that didn't come back in, the places where we fell short in reaching our goal in apportionments or meeting our budget. And sometimes we get so caught up in that, we forget to see what we did. And a lot of times that leads us to forget to thank people for what they've done and their amazing generosity. But friends, in 2011, United Methodist gave $6.2 billion to your church. Well, not your church particularly, you would remember that, I guess. But to all of our churches, to our connected church, $6.2 billion. That's an amazing amount. I can't even begin to grasp that amount or imagine it. I had to break it down more. On average, it's $121 million every Sunday that our people take out of their pockets and their purses and their wallets, and they put it in the hands of our church. I meet a lot of United Methodists when I travel. I've been traveling for about 7 years talking about this. I haven't met too many that couldn't find something else to do with that money. Take a little better vacation, fix up the house, get the kids' teeth fixed or something like that, college fund, a whole bunch of different reasons. But instead of that, they take it out of their pockets and their wallets and their purses and they put it in your offering plates and they say, do something good with this. Touch somebody's life. Make a difference. Make some disciples. Make stronger disciples. Transform the world. Transform some individuals. It's an amazing act of generosity on the part of our people. And I want to say thank you to you, and I hope that you will pass that thank you on to the people in your congregation, because they are amazingly generous. In the stewardship world, and Dan knows, one of the things we keep talking about now is how do we create a culture of generosity in our churches? But I've kind of changed my talk about that, because I think there is a culture of generosity in our churches. The thing is, we need to invite more people in our churches to participate in it. I think if you reflect on your local church, you probably do have people who really know the depth of joy of finding that spirit of generosity and giving beyond just what they think they have to give, but giving with the joy and knowing that they find joy in helping others, in making a difference and changing the world. So $121 million each Sunday. We need to thank people for that. But even $121 million, this may come as a surprise to you, but it's a little hard for me to imagine. I don't really work with that kind of money all the time. So I had to break it down further, and it's really $12,000 every minute, every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that our people put in our hands, that we might do some good with it, to make God's love real in a hurting world. Pretty amazing. Well, I shared that story about Kathy Gilbert and her experience in Liberia, but there's more to that story. And we heard the story and we were moved by it, so we followed it a little farther.
I'm not sure where that $20 ended up, but I know that it did some good.
They collected what amounted to $20. It is important to us. Every $20 adds up. We went to the computer and figured it out. It was worth $1,000 to them. We were thrilled when the bishop selected us to make this donation, very, very symbolic of children that we know are, in some instances, as desperately in need as our kids, because they're going through a different war. For our kids, it's a daily war, surviving. The majority of the children today are referred to us by the state because of abuse and neglect in most instances. For some, either the foster parents were never prepared for the need, or the children's needs were never addressed. Especially a child who's, born drug addicted, for example, or a 3 or 4 year old that's being prostituted by the parents for drugs. These situations are just very common to us. Horrific, but common. No one else knows what to do with them or wants them. So we take them and we do everything we can to heal them and to reunite them with whatever possibilities there are from their family or creating a new family for them. There is an agency called the Methodist Home for Children in New Orleans. It's a sister agency of ours, and their evacuation plan has been to move to Ruston. Typically, what they've done is they've packed up, showed up for 3 days, and then they've been able to go back home when a hurricane hits. Well, that's what happened back in August 28th.
The waves are crashing in. The water is on the rise, and this storm is far from being over.
They thought they were going to come for 3 days. Well, of course, 5.5 months later, after a tremendous amount of work, we were able to return them back to their home there. But it wasn't the same home they left. Obviously, the community has changed a lot, and the ability to be able to meet the needs in that setting is very questionable even today. The young kids from Liberia realized that children in America or in Louisiana were desperately in need.
Thank you for sending us $20, and thank you for donating the money, and have a blessed life.
I think that second part is so important to share, because being a connected church means more than just that we have a lot of different places from which we can draw funds when there's a disaster. Being a connected church also means that we have a network already in place that when there is a need and someone gives, that we know that we can find that network to get help to people quickly, wherever it is. We praise the work that UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, does. And they respond to disasters. And some of you probably have had experiences close by where they've responded in times, not just like the hurricanes or the tsunamis, but they've responded to other disasters. And it's easy to think sometimes that UMCOR is this giant corps of disaster response workers ready to spring into action. But the reality is that UMCOR is about 5 people. We are the giant corps of people ready to spring into action. It's the people in the church. And that's the network that UMCOR has. When there's a disaster, when something comes, when the storm like Sandy hits New Jersey, UMCOR contacts the bishop and says, what do you need? What can we have? We've got volunteer and mission teams all over the country that are waiting, that we can mobilize when you're ready to have them. I was the director of Connectional Ministries in New Jersey. I took that office on July 1st, 2001, and September 11th, 2001, our whole world changed. After 9/11, we had churches that lost up to 40 people, 40 members of their church who were killed in the towers. But we had thousands of people who survived the attack, but whose lives were devastated because the entire lower Manhattan region became completely barren of work and the work that these people did. And so we applied to a grant for UMCOR to try and help the people who were in the New Jersey side recover from 9/11, and we asked them for $350,000. And UMCOR sent our application back to us, and they said, you're not thinking big enough and you're not thinking long enough. Because, you know, UMCOR's thing is long-term recovery. UMCOR is not always the first ones on the scene. Sometimes they are, but they are always, and I say always without equivocating, they are always the last ones to leave, because UMCOR's specialty is long-term recovery. And so they sent it back to us. They said, think bigger, think longer. We submitted a grant for $4.5 million. It was money that came from your churches that you gave in that offering, Love in the Midst of Tragedy. And we developed a program with a team of 7 social workers who found the families who had slipped through the cracks, who had lost work, who were in danger of losing their homes. And they managed to help these people sometimes sell their homes and to move into different, more affordable housing, sometimes to get retrained, sometimes to get the health care and the mental health care that they needed after that trauma. And we had 600 cases that we approached and 600 that we moved to recovery in the 4 years we did that. But that happened because we had a network in place. We didn't have to start from scratch when there's a disaster. We know there are people there. I tell people all the time, how many of you know or are familiar with or have participated in Nothing But Nets or Imagine No Malaria? And you're familiar with that. Well, I was at United Methodist Communications when we got the first contact about Nothing But Nets. And the UN Foundation that was managing that work of bed net distribution came to the United Methodist Church, not because we had a lot of people they could ask to give money, but because the United Methodist Church, we already had people deployed all over Africa who were already doing work and trying to educate people about health care and how to prevent disease. And so for the UN Foundation, we were a valued partner because we had this connection that extended across Africa. And our people responded as we shared with them the opportunity to give 10 nets. It would buy a bed net. It would save a child's life. When we first got involved back in around 2007, 2008, what the UN Foundation told us was that every 30 seconds a child died from malaria. 3,000 children a day died from malaria. Since United Methodists have been involved in about 5 years, if you go to the ImagineNoMalaria.org website today when you go home, what you'll see is that every 60 seconds a child dies from malaria, about 1,500 a day. We have cut malaria deaths in half. Still way too many children dying from malaria. And we've set a goal of $75 million, not from your apportionments, but additional money to be raised through annual conferences and private gifts to put bed nets all across Africa. It's just amazing what that connection can do and how we can affect the world and how we can change the world. Let me just use one example. And I have to usually stop and tell people at this point, this is a picture taken by Mike DeBose, who's a photographer at UMCOM, and again, another friend of mine. But I want people to know these are not stock images. Mike's job is to go around the world and point his camera at places where United Methodists are in ministry. So all the pictures that are in this presentation are pictures that have come out of that work of finding United Methodists. But in United Methodist, this is the United Methodist School in Zimbabwe as an example. This child is eating this meal, which is certainly the largest meal he'll have of the day, maybe the only meal he'll have of that day at his school, because of what your church did when they gave their money through your apportion funds so the conference could send that World Service apportionment in. It made this school possible, and this young man, and not just his lunch, but his school, his books, his pencils, his papers, the lights, the teacher, not just for him, but for all these children. That was made possible by what you did when you gave that, when you sent that apportion check to the conference, to Lisa, to the conference treasurer, so that she might fulfill Wisconsin's responsibility, or Wisconsin's fair share of our general church asking. But the question that I ask folks all the time when I travel around is, could your local church take on that responsibility to see that that child had that lunch and those books and that school and the teacher and the pencil and the paper and the lights and all those things, and not just that child, but all those children, day in and day out, week after week, month after month? And the reality is for most of us that we couldn't take on that responsibility. That commitment would be a little bit out of our reach. There may be some really big churches across the denomination. We have some really big ones, and maybe one of those churches could support a school like this in Zimbabwe. This is just one place, though, of hundreds of places where we're doing the same kind of work around the world. And so here's the question. Before I even mention to you about what the funds of the church are, before I even lift to you what the special Sundays are, or really go into depth about what the advance is, before we even talk about any of that stuff, I think it's so crucial that we find ways to tell people stories that change the image of what it means to be a connected church. I'm so tired of hearing from people and talking to people who see our apportionment and our ministry shares as this rock that's hung around the neck of the local church to keep churches from being in ministry. I know that paying apportionments are hard. I was a local church pastor, but that image is so wrong. It's not something that keeps us from ministry. It's something that expands our ministries in ways we couldn't do by ourselves. And it doesn't necessarily make it easier, but at least if our folks know that the sacrifices they make to pay those apportionments have an enormous impact, then at least they can feel better about making that sacrifice. When I was a local church pastor, one of the questions that people would ask me, oftentimes I'd get myself in this conversation, and I think of one person in particular I have to, and the conversation would go something like this, and I don't know if there's pastors in the room, but you may have had this conversation, but it goes something like, Pastor Ken, did you happen to see that church down on Route 9? You know the church I'm talking about? That independent church? They just redid their parking lot, and it's beautiful, and it's got smooth blacktop. They don't have any holes or cracks in their parking lot. Straight white lines and little islands with shrubs and lights that go on and off, on at night and go off in the morning. They have this beautiful parking lot, but I guess they can afford to do that because they don't have to pay apportionments. And I have to tell you that if Bishop Scholl, my bishop, should decide in his wisdom that I need to get back into a local church, and somebody comes to me, walks up to me with that question, they're in trouble because I've been practicing my answer everywhere I go for the last 7 years. And I could easily do 20 or 30 minutes on it, I tell you, without a doubt, but I'll give you the short version. The short version goes like this, and I would say, Debbie, you're absolutely right. I saw that parking lot and it's beautiful. The lines are nice and bright and straight, and the blacktop smooth, and those islands, boy, in the spring when those shrubs bloom, they're going to be gorgeous. And those lights on and off, it's a beautiful parking lot. No doubt. But you know something? It was about 30 years ago. Some United Methodists had decided that we had been responding to disasters in sub-Saharan Africa, famine, disease, these different disasters that came up, and we would respond to them like United Methodists do, one after the other. And people began to ask the question, is there something that we could do that could change the future of Africa? Is there something that we could do that could change the balance, change the game a little bit? And they came up with this dream, this idea that we could build a university in sub-Saharan Africa that would teach agriculture and health sciences and would change the future of Africa. And the reality was that when they shared that idea, everybody said they were crazy. They said sub-Saharan Africa can't support something like that. The governments are too unstable. The economy is too weak. You'll never see it come to fruition. It'll be like throwing money away. Somebody actually said it'll be like throwing money down a rat hole. But you know, United Methodists are stubborn. They held on to that dream. And 30 years later, we have Africa University. Just celebrated 20 years of being open. We have 5,000 graduates from Africa University, most of whom have returned to the 22 countries they come from. And they're working in all levels of government, of agriculture, of health sciences, of education, in theology, and they are changing the face of Africa. And right now, as we speak, we have over 1,200 students enrolled in Africa University in a country in Zimbabwe that over the last 5 years has seen the worst inflation that any country in the world has ever experienced. But Africa University never closed their doors a day. They paid their faculty. Sometimes they had to pay their faculty every 2 days, because if a faculty member took their salary and took it home and put it on the dresser, the next morning it'd be worth half as much. The inflation was so bad. So people would take their salary and have to spend it on their way home to maintain its value. In the midst of all of that, we paid our faculty, we kept the doors open, we fed our students 3 meals a day. And you know what? It is the shining light of Africa. And that church down on Route 9, they've got a beautiful parking lot, but they can't do Africa University. Because it took a church like the United Methodist Church that was willing to work together and to stay in something for the long haul that could make that dream a reality. And it's become a reality. And we are changing the future of Africa. You could say the same about Nothing But Nets. Our dream is that we will cover the continent of Africa in bed nets, so that these children that die from a disease that we've eradicated and that's easily treatable and easily preventable will no longer be dying from malaria. And we have the size, we have the scope, but most importantly, we have the connection and the commitment of people to give together that can make that happen. We know that local churches face enormous pressures. It's a struggle. A lot of our churches in the U.S. are facing that struggle. When I was at DCM, I spent a lot of my time visiting with churches that were struggling to pay their apportionments. Staff salaries were going up, healthcare costs were going up every year, fuel costs after 9/11 in New Jersey, property insurance. We had group property insurance, and the insurance company tried to raise our insurance premiums 300%. We actually had to go to court, take the insurance companies to court to say they couldn't do that to the churches, and we won. And they had a much more modest increase, but it was still an increase. The churches were struggling with all these needs. And yet in the midst of that, trying to make those connectional commitments. When the tsunami hit in Southeast Asia, which actually happened at the end of 2004, but we really responded in the beginning of 2005. And then later on that same year, when Katrina and Rita gave that 1-2 punch to the Gulf. Do you know what our people did? United Methodists in 2005 gave over $100 million to UMCOR. Above and beyond their conference apportionments, above and beyond all the general church apportionments. In fact, more money came to UMCOR in those 2 appeals than all the general church askings put together. In the midst of all those struggles, just a few years ago, I was working in United Methodist Communications about 3:30 in the afternoon, around that time in the day when you're kind of thinking, what should I start now that I'm going to get done because it's almost time to go home. And we began to hear about the earthquake in Haiti. And as soon as we heard about that, we realized that we were all going to be there all night. Not because there was a lot of news that we could gather about the earthquake in Haiti, and not simply because our senior staff of UMCOR, two of our leaders of UMCOR, were in Haiti. In fact, were killed when the Hotel Montana collapsed. That's a picture of the Hotel Montana. But because we knew that local churches would start calling immediately and saying, what can we do? We want to send money. Where do we send it? Do they need flood buckets? Do they need health kits? We have a VIM team. How soon can we get our VIM team ready to go? And literally all night long we answered phone calls from United Methodist and local church folks to say, we've seen what's happened. We're watching this on the news. What can we do? Because that's who our people are. And so that's the question. Why in the midst of all those pressures that churches are under? Why that enormous outpouring? And this is the only answer that I can find, that I can come up with. When our people are presented with a need in a way that touches their hearts, they find a way to give. That's who United Methodists are. You may have experienced that in your local church. You do your stewardship campaign. You say, you know what, we did a great stewardship campaign. We got every pledge card, every dollar there is out there to get. We really did it up right to the end. We pushed it to the limit. And then a week later, one of the families in the church goes through a crisis. There's a fire, a spouse dies, an income earner is gone or disabled. And all of a sudden what happens? People approach you as a pastor and they say, I know that family's hurting. We have a little bit of money put aside. We'd like you to get this to them. They don't need to know where it came from, but we know they're hurting and this would probably help. That's who our people are. That's the generosity that lives in our churches. So here's the issue with the tsunami, with the hurricanes Rita and Katrina, with the earthquake. We didn't have to tell that story. People saw that story. It came to them over the TV and the internet and through magazines and newspapers. In fact, I tell people the story that during the Haiti earthquake, for some reason that we still haven't figured out, one of the CNN persons who has a show, I think it was Nancy Grace, at the end of her show, after spending the whole time talking about Haiti, decided to put up the UMCOR number and tell people, this is where you need to give because 100% of your gift goes to help people in need. During the Haiti earthquake, we even had Baptist churches that were calling us and saying, we heard that you guys give 100%. Our denomination can't do that. Can we send our money to you? And we said, well, yeah, our apportionments are paying the other part of that, but yeah, we'll be happy to take your money and send it to Haiti. That's no problem. But those kind of disasters, the story gets to people immediately. But every day through what you give for world service, people's lives are being touched. People are being helped through a crisis. When it's just one person, it's not on the news and it's not in the papers. And a friend of mine coined this phrase, a silent tsunami, and I love it. People are going through their own silent tsunamis, and the church is there to meet them. Maybe it's your church that meets. Maybe it's a church in another country. Maybe it's a church in another conference that gets a grant to help do a program to reach out to people in poverty who are trying to get from welfare to work, but they need some place for their kid to go, and they don't have any money to provide that. And the church opens its doors because that's its policy. We're never going to turn a child away because the family can't afford to pay. Every day those stories happen, and the challenge for us is to find those stories and tell them to people. So people know how they're making a difference, not just in the midst of crises, but day to day, helping people's lives get better. So we need to tell our story. We need to tell the story of our historical commitment to education and healthcare in the United Methodist Church. We think sometimes with things like Africa University or the work in malaria that working on education and health is new to us, but it's not. It's part of our DNA. It goes all the way back to Wesley. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the church in this country. We need to tell people those stories so they understand what kind of an impact their church has made. We need to talk about a church that's never been afraid to make a witness and to speak up for people who didn't have a voice of their own. To be advocates for people who needed an advocate. We need to tell the story of children whose lives have been devastated, who wouldn't have a home, who wouldn't have access to a school, but because of what your church does, when they send out a portion check to the conference, when they participate in this connection, these children have a place where they're loved and they're fed and they're taught. And they can actually dream because of what you do. They can dream about the fact that they might actually be able to grow up and go someplace like Africa University and be a part of that future of Africa that's going to change the game. We need to tell the story of places, of a church that thinks that no place is too far to go to bring the gospel. This is a picture that I took. I had the opportunity to go to Liberia a few years ago for their annual conference, and we were going from Monrovia, where the conference was, to the Ganta Hospitals, United Methodist Hospital. If you saw it, you wouldn't call it a hospital, you'd say it was a clinic. They call it a hospital because it's the only health care in an area of Liberia that serves 750,000 people. This is the only health care that's there. And so we were driving, and in the process, we went through this little village of Kakata. And out of the corner of my eye, I had my camera on my lap, thank heaven. We're in a van, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this familiar shape. You know, these Cokesbury signs that you see all across the country. Most of the time, we've let them be overgrown with vines and leaves and whatever. Someday I'm going to travel with hedge clippers and fix all that. But anyway, I see this in the midst of this little village in Africa, and I look up, and I put my camera up, and I took this picture, and I got lucky, and it's the United Methodist Church of Kakata in the same font that the Cokesbury signs use. But what I didn't realize in the picture and what I saw afterwards when I got it home and I looked at it is that someone had gone in with a paintbrush and they wrote in the First United Methodist Church of Kakata. Because they wanted to make sure that when the other churches came, they knew that they were first. We import United Methodism to other countries. We import it all the way, you know. But we need to tell the story of places like that. Not everybody gets to see that. Not everybody gets to see how the church works in these other places, but we need to tell people those stories. We need to tell people the stories about how we go and we help people in disasters, even in places where we can't start churches. I had someone who heard me say this in a workshop, and he raised his hand and he said, we sometimes take some heat for this. And I knew what he was talking about. Because United Methodists often, we get criticism from others that we're more about helping in disaster response, even in places, and some people who won't go in and do disaster response unless they're able to go in with missionaries and set up churches and preach the gospel. And when the young man asked me this, all I could say to him is, I said, you're right, we do take heat for it. And all I can say is that we believe that we're doing what Christ would have us do. We're responding with compassion when people are hurting. And my personal belief is that sometimes that act speaks louder than any sermon we can preach. And so we do that. We need to tell people that. We also need to tell the stories of how day in and day out we are working to help people, not just by giving them bread or helping them in a disaster, but in giving them the tools they need to raise themselves out of poverty. Our Board of Global Ministries does this all the time. I have a story that I love to tell. When I was in Liberia, it was right after the Civil War. The UN troops were all around. In fact, a year before I took this picture, this young man was probably running around with a gun in his hands on one side or the other. Most of the young people were. They told us it would be good to wear clergy shirts, and I didn't usually wear a clergy shirt, with the collar and the tab and all that, but I had one in the closet. I bought another one from Cokesbury. And so we went over there, and I was wearing a clergy shirt, and I had it all, buttoned up and everything. And one of the Liberian pastors came up to me, and he was pointing, and we were, saying hello and all that, and he was pointing at my neck, and he's saying, "Oh, that's so nice, that's so nice." And I'm trying to looking down, and I didn't have a cross or anything on it. I said, "What are you talking about?" He was pointing at the collar, at the plastic tab in the collar. And I said, "This?" And he said, "Oh, can I see it?" I said, "Yeah." I took the little plastic tab out, and I gave it to him, and he looked at it, he said, "Oh, this is beautiful." Well, he had a clergy shirt on, and so I said to him, I said, "Well, what do you use for a tab?" Thinking, he had some clever thing or whatever. And he pulled out what he was using, which was a piece of white enamel sheet metal. And he had obviously been cut out of the side of a stove or a refrigerator or something like that. And He probably had rubbed it against a rock to try and smooth the edge down, but when I looked at his neck, I could see the mark on his neck because he probably wore it all the time. And I was kind of dumbfounded, and so stupid question, I just said, well, where do pastors in Liberia get their clergy shirts? Thinking, you don't have a clergy shirt store down in the corner or whatever. I wasn't really thinking. And he said, well, we have to order them from Cokesbury in the U.S. And so I thought for a minute, and I said, okay, now I just ordered a shirt. It was $35. I have no idea what the shipping cost to Liberia. And I also knew that pastors in Liberia made about $30 a month at that point when they got paid. And it just kind of blew me away. So obviously I gave him my tab, and the fellow who was with me took his tab out and gave it to this man. And you'd think we had given him, gold or something. But I also noticed at the time that the shirt that he was wearing, he was probably the 6th or the 7th or the 8th owner of that shirt, because it was pretty much transparent almost against the skin. We got back on the bus and we started talking about what can we do about this? It's a simple little thing, but it'd make a difference. What can we do about this for the pastors in Liberia? And sitting in front of us was one of our lay leaders, who was a woman who was active with the United Methodist Conference, United Methodist Women. Thank God for the United Methodist Women. And so she said, well, last year our United Methodist Women, our Conference of United Methodist Women, sent sewing machines to the United Methodist Women in Liberia. We sent 10 new sewing machines to the United Methodist Women in Liberia. And we said, maybe we could get the United Methodist Women to make clergy shirts. So we went to conference. This was in February when Liberia had their conference. In June, we went to our conference. We took up a special offering. We got $5,600. We bought black fabric. We bought patterns. We invited people to cut up Clorox bottles to make the plastic tabs. We got so many plastic tabs. They're probably still in the conference office basement, I think. We got bags and bags of these bags. But we put it all in barrels, put it on a container, sent it over to Liberia. The United Methodist Women started making clergy shirts. And the women who sewed got a little bit of money to take home. The United Methodist Women got a little bit of money for their treasury to get some more fabric. The pastors got clergy shirts that they could afford. Everybody won. Except Cokesbury, of course, but they've gotten over it. But the idea was it would have been easy to take that $5,600 and have the conference treasurer send it to Bishop Innes and say, we want to do something good with this. It's a lot more work to kind of take that and make it in a way that provided tools and the help for people to do the things that help themselves. But I tell that story because I tell you that our Board of Global Ministries people do that every single day. Every single day, they are about the business of finding ways to help people raise themselves out of poverty. And not just the Board of Global Ministries, but other agencies as well, that make that goal to work not for the poor, but with the poor. And we need to tell people those stories. And before I pass it to Dan to tell you a little bit about how those stories impact within the boundaries of your Wisconsin conference, let me last say a word about our missionaries. We have missionaries all around the world. This young woman in the center, Clara, who works in Cambodia with these children who spend their days picking through the garbage dumps, trying to find things they can bring home to help their families. And Clara has been in mission and ministry with these people for years, leaving the comfort of her home, her friends, her family, to live in Cambodia and to be my representative and your church's representative in compassion and ministry with these children and the families who live here. I shared this actually in Wisconsin. I was doing a workshop, I believe it was near Racine, a few years ago when I came back in February. I was here in February. It's much nicer to come in August, let me tell you. But I was here in February and I told the story and I saw a hand go up in the back of the church. It was one of these long, kind of long, narrow churches. And this hand went up. I've never got a question at this slide. And I said, yeah. And this pastor stood up and he said, well, I'm from Cambodia and I just was there. And I need to tell you that there's a school there now. And that it was built with money from the Board of Global Ministries, from the World Service Fund, and from money from the United Methodist Women. And so now Clara, in addition to her ministry, has a school where the kids can spend part of the day learning, still scavenging for what they can do to help their families. But that happened because of your local church. And it happened because the commitment your local church made to do their best to try and do this part of their ministry, in addition to what they do locally, to share in a way that reaches the boundaries of the conference, but also reaches beyond the boundaries of Wisconsin to touch places throughout the world. I'm going to ask Dan to share a little bit about with you, or share more than a little bit. I said a little bit, and he said it's going to be more than a little bit. Share the balance of this program really with you about what are the ways that you can tell people in your church about how their apportion giving impacts people closer to home, not far from them, places they know and places they've been. And I was happy to find this picture. This is Wisconsin flood bucketing. I gotta be careful how I said it. Flood bucketing. And I told people at Pine Lake, my understanding is that Wisconsin is the flood bucket capital of the denomination, that you guys have a reputation for being able to put those flood buckets together. But Dan will tell you a little bit about the conference part of that, and I will pass a microphone back to him.
Okay, we've been sharing quite a bit of important information, but I left out the really important information when I was first greeting you, and that is we do have refreshments set over at the side, and feel free. This is an informal enough time that you can get up and refresh as you want to, and then restrooms are in the hallway. Well, they're not in the hallway. They're off the hallway, just through those doors, so that should you need the basic hospitality needs, wanted to bring up some of the truly important information you need this afternoon. I do want to transition and talk a little bit about our Wisconsin conference, but in listening to Ken triggered two stories personally that have been really formative for me as part of the connectional ministries of our church. Both of these have to do with Africa and how our witness and our connection continues. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Malawi. And at this time, this was 1998, there was in the area of Mozambique, Malawi, surrounding areas, landmines had been planted during the civil strife and the wars down there. And so landmines were a huge problem because the military would move through, they'd plant the landmines, they'd move on and leave the landmines. And not only did they leave the landmines, which then civilians, many children would step on and trigger and be disabled. What would happen, we had one trip canceled, postponed, because the monsoon season came through and the rains came through and the mudslides came through, and all of the landmines that had been identified and marked moved. And so there was all this problem. Well, in 1997, the United Methodist Committee on Relief and the Army Corps of Engineers partnered together and went in and cleared landmines in the areas north of Malawi. And so in 1998, we went to all of these villages in Malawi. And some of them, I talk about surrounding Malawi, some of them were 3 and 4 hours away. And because of the war, because of the things that had happened, most of the villages were predominantly women and old men and young children. And so we would drive into these villages, and we came into one village, and as the bus, and I say bus advisedly, it was basically the frame of a vehicle that we kind of hung on and bounced along in. As the bus stopped, women from all over the village came pouring out. And when they got to us, they dropped to their knees and took our hands and just started talking very quickly. And our translator said, "Do you know what they're saying?" And we said, "No." And he said, "They're saying, oh, you are the people of the very good church. You are the people from the very good church." I thought, wow, what a nice feeling to go someplace and have the United Methodist Church called the very good church. And we were seen as really being a church that was there working with them about what was day to day their crisis situation. And I remember this was another just situation a lot like the clergy collars that put things in perspective, how our reality is very different from a significant part of the world. I was meeting with a couple of pastors, and at some point in our conversation, someone said something, and I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a little square of Post-it notes to write something down. And when I pulled it out of my pocket, the one pastor, his eyes lit up and his mouth dropped open. And he said, can I touch that? Can I hold that? And I thought, okay. And I gave him this little square of Post-it notes. And he held it for a moment and he said, do you realize that on our black market, this would run for between $50 and $75? And I said, no, if you'd like, didn't even think about it. Would you like it? And tears came into this man's eyes, and he threw his arms around me and he said, this is more paper than I've had in my entire life. And I thought, okay, a different world. If a pack of Post-it notes can make that big an impact, we need to realize even the small gestures mean an awful lot. So I want to talk for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to see if you have any questions that you'd like to raise with us. But I want to share the story a little bit more directly about Wisconsin and what's going on in our Wisconsin annual conference. One thing I want to frame this with is we talk a lot about the bottom line and how much our apportionments cost, and Ken was talking about that sense that sometimes it feels like such a burden. If we break it down, it was nice of you to take those big numbers and break them down a little bit. I want to break them down a little bit further to what I think are really understandable and manageable figures. If you break it down to ask, well, so what do our apportionments cost us each week? Per member per week, our apportionments are $1.78. $1.78 per member per week, less than $2. I waste more than $2 every week. You know, I stop and I have a favorite coffee shop, and I can't get a cup of coffee there for less than $2. So as far as $1.78 a week, that's not a huge amount. That's $92.56 a year per member to completely fund our apportionments. When I was in the last church I served in New Jersey, I came to a church that had not been able to pay their apportionments in 18 years. And so one of the things my district superintendent said when I was appointed there is, I'd like you to work on that. Like to see you do a little better with that. And I was new to this setting, and I thought, well, what can I do to kind of generate some interest in the apportionments? And the thing we did that worked really wonderfully is we issued the $100 challenge. The $100 challenge was to say, okay, over the course of the next year, you have 12 months to do this. We want every man, woman, youth, child to come up with a way that they will, either from saving or from their allowance or from a fundraiser, some way, every person make a commitment to pay $100 over the course of the year to apportionments. We didn't stop there. We extended this to say also the same challenge goes out to every Sunday school class, to every committee, to every UMW circle, to every group we have in the church. Your group also, try to raise $100. And we got playful and we got competitive with it. And we had months where we had the youth against the adults and the men against the women and the United Methodist men against the United Methodist women, which in that church was very unfair because we had about 45 United Methodist women and I think we had 2 United Methodist men. But anyway, you know, we had this competitive thing. And in November of the year, we had a night where we had a church supper competition, where the men had a spaghetti supper at the church and the women had a chicken and biscuit supper at the firehouse and the youth had a pancake supper down at the school all the same night at exactly the same time. So you had to either make a choice or you had to be really committed to eating that night to support the ministries. And that year, we paid 212% of our apportionments. Not only did we pay it, we made up for a year that we hadn't been able to pay. And what was great about it was not one person griped about having to pay it. It was fun. It was exciting. And we didn't even focus on what the money did. We just got playful with the idea of who could raise the most to support the ministries of the church. So for $100 per person a year, here is what we're able to do. And this is This is a long list. It's kind of exhaustive. I was in a church not long ago where I was going through this, and a woman halfway back said, "All right already. That list is so long." And I thought, okay, so our list of ministry is too long? When does the list of ministry you support get too long? This is a long list. We're doing a lot of things. We have camp ministries. The camps at Lake Lucerne and Pine Lake are doing wonderful ministries year-round. We have camps for children, for youth, for families. We have the grandparent camps. We host workshops and retreats there. We just came from the stewardship retreat. A couple of weeks ago, I visited the camp. We had a special needs camp. We had people with fairly severe mental and physical challenges that came together for a week. And there was some spirituality and some biblical reflection. There was arts and crafts. There were these wonderful activities. And I was with one of the happiest groups of people, having the time of their life. Every person should make a field trip. If you haven't been to our camps for a while, go up. And we have people on site. They can give you a tour. You need to see what beautiful resources we have, because there's life-changing ministry going on there. I talk to young pastors in this conference who will say how significant their experiences were at camp. And their camp experiences are significant contributors to why they decided to go into ministry as a vocation and a career. This is life-changing work, beautiful setting, a wonderful program. We have programs, different groups in our annual conference that are working on various ministries to the poor and marginalized. We have food ministries, community gardens and soup kitchens and food pantries. We have some sheltering ministries in almost all of our major metro areas and in some of our rural areas. We're working to provide health care. We've got groups working on issues of racism, championing the rights of those with handicapping conditions, helping immigrants to develop job skills and to adjust to our Wisconsin culture. We have groups working on domestic violence and human trafficking, substance abuse, bullying, gang violence. All of these ministries are working in regions and through the conference to bring aid and relief to a wide variety of people within our state. We support 15 different health and welfare ministries that are focused on assisted living, geriatric health care, mental health care, hospital nursing care chaplaincies, our parish nurse ministries, hospice care and end-of-life home care. Just to share a few stories, because we have some ministries that are just amazing ministries. And if you haven't gone to visit them or you don't know about them, take some time. Get to know what your ministries are around the state. Harbor House up in Superior is a shelter and an equipping and empowering ministry for single women and abandoned women, abused women. It is an amazing setting where we have 2 living facilities where women are able to get back on their feet. When I had first come here, I came here in 2009 in July, and in September I went up to visit Harbor House for the very first time. And Barb Sutter-Werner is the director of this ministry, and she was giving me the tour and showing me around and introducing me to some of the people who were receiving help from that ministry. And while I was in one area, there was a home where a number of women were living, and there's a general gathering area with a TV and things like that. So Barb took me in, and I was greeting people, and she got called away. And so I was left there with 5 or 6 women who were feeling awkward with me there, and I was feeling awkward with them there, and we were just kind of trying to chat and things, and I could tell that they weren't that comfortable. So I kind of excused myself and said, I'll just go stand over here and look out the window. But this one woman had been watching me, and every time I'd make eye contact with her, she'd look away. And so I knew she was a little nervous, but I got up to leave, and she got up and chased after me and kind of tugged on my sleeve, and she said, "Before you go, I need to tell you something, and I need to say something to you. Whoever is responsible for this ministry, whatever it takes to keep this ministry going, please go back and tell people thank you and how important this ministry is." She said, "I was abandoned by my husband. He kicked me out, had 2 small children. Said I have had some psychological problems. I've had all kinds of difficulties in my life. I really didn't have any marketable job skills. I went out on the street with my kids, and I wasn't able to really handle them. One of my youngest son has some problems with autism, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. So I had decided I was going to commit suicide. And I found a friend who was willing to take my kids. And she said, I went to drop my kids off, and this woman said, I want to take you someplace. I want to see, I want to try one more thing to get you some help. And she brought me here. And she said, this place saved my life. They've worked with me. They've helped me to get job skills. They've helped me to get work. They're helping me to get a place that I can afford to live. I'm going to get my kids back. I'm getting health care. I couldn't have done any of this on my own. This place, Harbor House, has given me a life and a future. Make sure people know this is a place that saves people's lives. That's Harbor House. That's something that we all are supporting. Sometimes we can feel, as Ken was saying, in a small church or in a church, we don't have some outreach ministry that we can do on our own. We need to understand this is not a ministry that somebody else is doing for us. This is our ministry that we're doing together. Northcott Neighborhood House. It's a ministry in Milwaukee that really focuses primarily on our youngsters, our kids that are high risk, that have some great potential, but are in a really, really difficult place in life. And once again, I want to share a story. This has happened a couple weeks ago, and it's such a great example of so many different things about how our ministry makes a difference in people's lives. I was at the Urban Strategy Network training in Milwaukee the first week of this month. And while I was there, I met this young man who came up to me and he said, I just want to make connection with you. I want to talk to you because I'm a former beneficiary of the Northcott Neighborhood House. He said, back in 1998, I was out on the street. I was part of a gang. We were getting into trouble. I was one of those high-risk kids you're talking about. We would break into homes and steal things. We even robbed a couple people out on the street. I was getting into drugs, all this stuff, got arrested. And one of the options that was given to me is that I could go to this Northcott Neighborhood House ministry. Said, I came here 15 years ago, and they really worked with me. I got into the Head Start program. I was part of the Midnight Basketball League. They worked with me. They helped me get a GED. They helped me get into college. They helped me find some people who would sponsor me and help me through. Today, he's 28 years old. He has a really good job and is really doing well for himself. But what he said is, I also learned from my upbringing that you don't need a lot to live. He said, I've made a choice. I'm still living in my neighborhood, the neighborhood I came out of. It's a rough place to live. It's not a good neighborhood. It's a tough place, but I'm there by choice. And he says, I really live very simply. I have 4 changes of clothes. I never have to worry about what I'm going to wear the next day because basically my options are very limited. He says, beyond that, I have 5 possessions. He says, I have a backpack, I have a laptop computer, I have a Kindle ebook reader, I have an iPod, and I have a bicycle. He said, I ride my bicycle to work every day. And he said, when I come home, I put out my computer. If I want to watch something on TV, I watch it on the computer. If I want to I put out my ebook reader, I put out my iPad, that's it. When I get up in the morning, pack it all back up in the backpack, take it with me, I go into work. He said, not long ago, he told a story. He said, I came home And it was obvious that somebody had broken into my apartment. The lock was broken, and he goes, I went in thinking, oh, you know, good luck for them. You know, there was nothing there to steal. He goes, I'm afraid they trashed the place. He goes, I looked around, not only had they not trashed the place, they left me a bag of groceries. So he said, you know, this is where I am. And I said, well, you've got a really good job. You're doing really well. I bet you're at least, you know, kind of saving toward the future, creating the future. And he said, well, you know, I don't have a lot of money. He said, I made a decision a few years ago. He said, right now I'm paying the tuition for a couple young guys to go to college so that they can get out of this life like I got out of this life. He said, I'm where I am today, doing what I am today because of Northcott Neighborhood House. So that whole concept of pay it forward, make a difference in people's lives, and then they do our ministry as it extends into the world. We also have the United Methodist Children's Services of Milwaukee, working with families, working with children, working with those people who just need a little extra help to get their life together so that they don't end up out on the street, so that they don't end up in the spiral of domestic violence or alcoholism or whatever the problems are. That was another place where, when I first visited, I was being shown around, and there are all these wonderful little kids. The place is full of life, full of energy. And I was standing talking to somebody, and this little girl, 6, 7 years old, big smile on her face, comes racing up to me. I'm a complete stranger, and she holds up this Hello Kitty pink backpack. And at the top of her voice says, look at this. This is mine. And she plops down in front of me and unzips it and starts taking everything out one piece at a time. There's pencils, and there's a pad of paper, and there's crayons, and there's an eraser, and she's just putting this stuff out, and she's sitting there just looking at it, looking up at me, and she said, this is all mine. And then she starts plopping it back in and zips it up and goes racing off again. And her mother was standing there, and she said, I have had such a struggle with her. She's always hated school. I've done everything to try to get her to go to school. This year she can't wait to go to school. This is the first time she's had anything new to take to school. And she's just so excited. So even those little things are the things that, by our support of ministry, we're able to give that kind of hope. The Hmong House of Good News. A few weeks ago at the School of Christian Mission, Mission U, sorry, they've changed the name. It's now Mission University, Mission U. I was there, and I met a young woman, late 20s, who has just come into this country in the last few years. She's Hmong. And what she was sharing in her story is that our culture is very different from their culture, which is still very much a patriarchal. The man is the head of the house and the head of the wife. And as she has tried to adjust to this culture, it's caused tensions in their home. And it has led to domestic abuse. It's led to her being the receiving end, the victim of domestic abuse. And she was here alone, no family, no one to turn to, no help. And one of the churches heard about what was going on and connected her with the Hmong House of Good News. They took her in, they've supported her, they've gotten both her and her husband into counseling. They're giving support to help people who are strangers in a strange land find that they do have a family, a community, through the work of the ministry of the United Methodist Church here in Wisconsin. Our disaster response and relief efforts, the flood buckets and the flood recovery. In 2008, the faithfulness and the organization of this annual conference led the government to come to us to ask if we would really administer the FEMA grants for flood recovery. And we organized to do that, and were able to organize to do that because of the apportionment support that let us get things together so that we were able to administer those funds. This year, when we had such a wet spring, you can remember we did have some rain this year. It's getting a little hard to remember right now. But we had some flood problems, and we were able to hire someone temporarily to really be our manager, to organize the caseworkers, to organize Wisconsin should pride itself. It is well regarded throughout the denomination for the quality of disaster response and flood work that it does here, and that's all due to the givings of our local churches. We do have the National Volunteers in Mission. We were at the First Church in Appleton, which is in 2 weeks, sending a VIM troop to New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy. So we build those connections. And international Volunteers in Mission. We have global partnerships with East Angola and the Dongbu Conference, where we are not just now talking about how do we visit and have nice social connections, but what kinds of missions and ministries can we be working on together? As part of Bishop Jung's vision for what he's calling soul food in Wisconsin, we are currently creating an extension ministries that is going to be called what's it going to be called? The Global Exchange Program. It's formerly been the Korean Exchange Program, which is where we bring farmers from Korea over to study agricultural methods, and then we send groups over to Korea to work there, and we're doing an international food cooperative that we hope to extend to beyond Korea to a variety of places in Asia. So that's happening. Campus ministries. We have so many. We have 9 different campus ministries that United Methodist Money support to be strengthening ministries with our young people. I traveled across the country, I travel across the conference. There are 2 things I hear from every single United Methodist church I ever visit. One is, we're a friendly church. Every United Methodist church. I have yet to go into a United Methodist church that says, we're really cantankerous, nasty people. We're a friendly church. The second thing every church says is, we want young people. We want to be in ministry with young people. We want to do something with young people. You are doing something with young people. You may not have them in your pew on Sunday morning, but together, collectively, we have ministries that are transforming lives. I sat with 2 young people who are part of the Crossing Ministry, which is the United Methodist and the Baptist and the UCC ministry at UW-Madison. These 2 young people, one male, one female, and I'm sorry, their names are out of my head right now. We were talking, and the young woman said, I came here with my intention. I studied and began my studies to be a corporate lawyer. She said, from the time I was a junior in high school, I decided I was going to be a rich, successful lawyer. That was my goal in life. And I came to UW to give me that launch. The young man said, I was going to go into investment banking. Both of them connected with the Crossing Ministry at UW-Madison. Both of them went on a quest trip, which is essentially an international volunteers in mission kind of process for the college students. But at UW, one of the things they do is the campus ministry doesn't create these mission projects for young people to go on. The young people take the lead and they make the contacts and they set up their own trips so that from the very outset, college students are creating these mission opportunities. Both of them were so affected by their first trip. They went on multiple trips. Now they are forming together a partnership and moving to India so that they can facilitate student trips from all over the world to come in to do mission work in India. They have given their lives to missionary service because of the United Methodist Church and the campus ministries that are supporting them. We are in ministry with young people. We need to understand and celebrate what those ministries are. And oh, by the way, those college campuses, they're in Ripon, Oshkosh, Menominee, River Falls, La Crosse, Milwaukee, Platteville, Whitewater, Madison, Stevens Point. They're all over. Call them. Invite a student to come and talk in your church. Share the story, because they all have wonderful stories of lives being changed. We're in ministry with young people. We've got new ministry starts. Not only new churches, but we have new missions, new faith groups. We have a launch of a new young adult ministry and congregation someplace in our conference. Yeah. the name of it? Do you remember? Okay, validation. We know that. Cambridge, thank you. So there are new opportunities started. Outreach to new populations. Our Monona UMC has just started, I think it's called Wiley Street Ministry, which is a ministry with young people down in the Madison downtown UW area. Willie Street. Okay. Thank you. So could you come up and do the end of this? So I'm messing up more than I'm actually getting right at this point. A new commitment and more clergy and laity training and continuing education. Lay servant ministries. I was talking with some of the folks that have been designing some of the curriculum and heard again, Wisconsin's lay servant ministries. We offer some of the most extensive training conference-wide of any conference right now. We're in a real focus for the leadership development. Our archives and history, in the last 2 years, this has become a much more active and focused ministry. Sometime in the next year, we will be opening the Sanborn Memorial Museum at the Conference Center, which will be an active and interactive museum for the Wisconsin Heritage United Methodist Evangelical Association United Brethren, in addition to the German, Norwegian, Armenian, Scandinavian, all the different bits and pieces coming together. We will be updating displays and collections on a regular basis, hopefully generating some traffic to and from the Conference Center for something other than a meeting. There'll be another reason to come. We are working with our commissions to really not just do some of the more passive monitoring work, but we're working with our commissions on religion and race, Commission on the Status and Role of Women, Christian Unity and Interreligious Concerns, to do much more education and much more resourcing of local churches so that we know together what some of these larger connectional ministries throughout our denomination and throughout our conference are. We're doing more and more local church resourcing and more opportunities like this to come out and hear about what's being done in the church. We have conflict transformation, where a conflict transformation team is available to come out to do some mediation, to do some facilitation in conflicted situations. And right now, one of the things that's happening that's so exciting is we are really beginning to step up both our ministry to young people and our youth ministry. We're launching a conference youth council and getting more and more out to where the youth are. We're moving away from the one time a year, one location, big event to more and more regional events in more areas with more focus on spiritual formation and leadership development. Hopefully we're not doing that at the expense of fun and fellowship, but in addition to fun and fellowship, we're really trying to work on helping to cultivate leadership with the young people. I've got a whole lot more. Like I say, it's an exhaustive list. All told, for our $1.78 per member per week, we're supporting over 400 separate ministries at the conference, denominational, global level. We're doing work that is changing lives, giving hope, saving lives. And this is what we're doing right now. This is who we are today. People ask, well, you know, how does it break down? They see this amount of money that goes to Sun Prairie or to the denomination, and they want to know, well, what are we actually, you know, how does that break down? Because a lot of people think the majority of it goes for administration or for salaries. So here's how it breaks down currently in the conference, and I'll put the asterisk here. A lot of this depends on which thing you put in which category. You could play loose and fast and make these statistics go different directions, but this is one way of looking at it. Right now, when you look at that $1.78 per week, 7% of that goes to administrative costs, overhead. 30% does go to salaries and support. But that includes all of our district superintendents. That includes the assistant to the bishop. That includes me and the director of communications. That's our benefits officer and our treasurer. That's our camp staff. That's the other coordinator level positions, our archivist. That's pretty much everything that keeps everything moving forward and running at that conference level. And so while it's 30% of that we give goes to the staff and support, a case can be made that a significant portion of that is actually ministry, is actually program related rather than administration. 42% goes and stays within our conference for conference ministries. 9% goes to our denomination to support all the different general boards and agencies. 12% goes to support our mission and ministry globally. So putting it another way, of the $1.78, 12 cents a week goes to overhead, goes to administration. 53 cents goes to salaries and support for all of the conference except the bishop. The bishop's part of our general church expenses. That way nobody can actually figure who to blame for what. You know, that's 16 cents goes to the denominational expense, and that does include the bishop's salaries. 21 cents is spent on global missions and ministries each week of that $1.78 per person. 75 cents funds the ministry's outreach and service in the Wisconsin Annual Conference. Sometimes we focus on the cost of apportionments. What we're asking you to do is instead focus on the value of apportionments, on what we get for what we give. We're hoping that through the course of this day, the course of this time together, that we were able to give you some stories to tell, to go back and share good news about what's happening in the conference. But even if you didn't get anything you want to go back and talk about, even if you don't have anything else that you can do, please, Ken and I are asking you together, do one thing. When you go back to your church, say thank you. Thank people for their faithful giving. Thank people for all the ways they're supporting all of these amazing ministries. Because it's too easy to get sucked into feeling bad about what we're not doing. When in fact, we need to be proud of what we accomplish. We need to be celebrating the good work that God is doing through us. So we wanted to celebrate the connection and share that. And we want to open up now and see, I didn't leave much time at all, if there are any questions you have or anything you'd like to ask. Yes?
So for people that want to do the volunteers and missions that you talked about, where do we go to get connected for ideas? What are those groups?
Okay. If you go to our website and the Volunteers in Mission, International Volunteers in Mission, all the contact information is there. And from time to time, we put out very specific descriptions of upcoming programs and what people are doing. Some of that is hit or miss because Volunteers in Mission in this conference has been going so long that some of the groups just kind of have their own world. I'm looking at Lisa because we've had this conversation before about after the trip is over, we start getting the expense vouchers and we're trying to figure out, well, who's, what, huh? So we're very active in Volunteers in Mission, International Volunteers in Mission. And if you haven't done it yet, there's great opportunity to get involved.
Yeah, I guess one of the gifts about Wisconsin and what we do is like when the government came and said we administer this grant throughout Wisconsin, when people were contacted for our leadership and connections from other ecumenical agencies and other projects, that they will seek out United Methodist folks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the hidden benefits, I think, is one of the ways that we continue to give beyond is to be involved in other programs and justice issues and people coming to a local church and saying, we want to connect with you.
Yep. Steve.
Two really basic questions. One, the word apportionment is one that's laden with all sorts of connotations in the local congregation. Is connectional giving sort of the preferred way of also identifying that?
Connectional giving is my preferred. I have used connectional giving for years because I think apportionment is one of those words we've done so much damage to, we'll not ever redeem it.
Right.
So I talk about connectional
giving.
giving.
Every week, and I'm thinking, boy, that'll get really people excited, and I just think it's a different way to communicate.
Yep.
Second basic question, and I'm sure this is plainly obvious, but one of the things that congregants will often say is, well, if our apportionment dollars are going to the camps, why does it still cost like $375 a camp? I'm assuming the basic economics is that without the connectional giving, that's going to be even more than that.
Yep.
I mean, their user fee is offsetting what they're still not getting from apportionment.
And yes, and so much of the apportionment right now, sadly, fixed costs. I would say insurance and property taxes and the different pieces that go into the infrastructure really do provide that basis. Program to program, camp to camp. You're paying speaker fees, food, lodging, you're paying the basic costs of that specific event. I'd love us to get to a place where we were receiving at a level where the sponsorships, scholarships could offset some of those costs, because we hear that a lot.
But that's helpful to realize, why the actual infrastructure of having camps is supported by that.
That's one of the great examples of something that at the conference level, a local church can't afford to own a camp, but together we can provide that so that everybody can benefit.
There's also, there's one thing about connectional giving. Connectional giving, I think, is a broad term that describes all of the stuff that the United Methodists do because we give together. Some of those are funded by apportionments. I didn't have time to talk about things like the special Sundays and the advance, which are outside of the apportionments. UMCOR really, the advance gets all of its support from World Service. UMCOR really gets most of its operating money from the 100 hour sharing. But when I talk about connectional giving, I'm talking about all the ways in which we as the United Methodists have decided that if we put resources together, we can do a lot more than we do individually. So that's the only distinction you have to make sometimes. Sometimes somebody will say to me, well, you said something about this, but that doesn't get apportionment money. That gets this money. I said, you're absolutely right.
Yep.
So connectional giving, I think, is kind of a way to talk in a broad way about what we do when we're together.
So there is a distinction.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a distinction, for example, like an UMCOR is a good example. It doesn't take money out from apportioned dollars. We were reminded when we were on the retreat, the foundation, your foundation is giving out stewardship grants. And people said, sometimes people come up with and say, well, we give apportionments and you're giving it back to us. But the foundation money is different money. It's invested for a town. It's not money to be paid. It's the commitment of your foundation to be educating people and stewardship of the people who provided, put money in their hands of the foundation. Right.
Yep. But it took us almost 22 years to get the phrase disciplinary obligations out of the language. It's going to take a while to get something different than apportionment.
Some conferences call them ministry shares, and I've had discussions with the people at GCFA, because they say, apportionments, we've used it, people don't like it, but if we picked another term, after a while they wouldn't like that. But, to me, apportionments talk about how the money is collected, and ministry shares talks more about how it's dispersed in mission. And so I have a friend at GCFA, we love it all the time. But anyway, there are some other terms that conferences are starting to use to communicate in a better way that doesn't sound like the heavy handed that sometimes people have associated with abortion.
Yes.
Everything you said today is awesome, and I learned a lot. I've heard about some of those Wisconsin places that we support.
Mm-hmm.
We need help sharing the message, getting the story across. This 2-hour conference was great, but everybody doesn't hear this. So we need minute messages where we try to give away blurbs of information. We need videos we can show. We need to hear your stories to make it more personal so that we can share that, because those are awesome stories, but they're not always you have an IT person that do media clips, video clips, little story newsletters.
One of the things we're currently working on, every week in our the e-news, we do these hallelujah moments. And Michelle Vernig, our Director of Communications, we've been talking about what would it take to make some of those hallelujah moments into videos rather than print pieces. How do we take some of these stories and put them together on a regular basis of even a bulletin insert so that people can put them in? We're also looking at and beginning to ask, what could we do to create some 30, 60, and 90-second video clips for churches that are using the multimedia in worship, so that these are not, most of what we have right now are 4 to 7 minute videos, not really conducive to slipping into the morning worship service. From this, we're going to go through, and we recorded this to see if there are some particular stories or things, clips that we could cut down and make available so that people can use that. But telling the story and doing it in a way that's not just print-bound, not just word-bound, I think is what we're working on. And thank you for raising it. It's been raised in 3 different locations now. The more we hear that's what we need, the higher it bumps up the priority list, and we can say, this is something we're getting requests for from all across the conference. So thank you for...
We're going to reach the young people too when we do that. We're losing our young people because they're keyed into that. We're not.
Yeah.
And trust me, they really keyed into those.
I'll just mention on a global level, 3 websites that you can go and look at when you're looking for stories. UMCgiving.org is the one that's strictly about how our connectional giving is making a difference. If you look at the bottom here, you see all of these are videos. Here's Bishop Young in a story about peace, calling for peace on the Korean Peninsula. There are a number of different videos and stories. You actually can even find, if you're looking for things that you can copy and insert into a bulletin, there's just 2 or 3 lines each week. There's a resource in there that it's called Mission Moments or Mission Nuggets or something like that. It's just to remind people, you know, that giving is making a difference. They're not stories, thankfully, not as long as when Dan and I start telling a story, you know, it's a sermon, really.
Goes on a ways.
But anyway, they're brief stories. And when I was working at United Methodist Communications, I was there 5 years, only left a little less than 2 years ago. We had heard from the churches that really don't give us any videos that are longer than 3 minutes. You know, 3 minutes is kind of the tops. And so that's really what we're kind of holding ourselves to and hoping. And some churches say even that's kind of long for us to stick in before the offering or whatever. But that's kind of what we're aiming for. So what you'll find up there are, you know, stories printed, videos and different things, even to reflect each of the, you know, the funds and different aspects that happen at the university, Black College Fund, all that. UMC Giving, the main denominational website is just umc.org. And you can go up there and you can even subscribe to it. So I get it every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. My first email into my email box is the United Methodist News Service Digest. It doesn't always have, you know, stories about giving, but it tells me real quick 4 or 5 stories about what's happening across the denominations. I have a stewardship site where I try to put the stewardship helps up. But I also mentioned to folks, and I can't remember if I stuck a slide up for here. Well, I have a Facebook page as well. But there's also a site that I don't have a slide, and I put it in at Pine Lake, but I haven't moved it over to this presentation. And that's umcmission.org. And that's the website for the Board of Global Ministries. And the great thing there is that you can see stories about all of our missionaries. All of our missionaries will write little stories, and you'll find stories about how mission people are deployed around the world. So there's just some great websites to connect with.
Those stories, compelling stories, you know, they go viral, as we say, and they connect people to us and to the church.
They do.
Really quickly, in 30, 60, 90 minutes.
Yep. Lisa, last word.
And I would add, if written stuff is okay, we have on the conference website, one specific to Wisconsin, bulletin inserts that Dan mostly did a little bit less than a year ago. I think there's 10 of them, if I remember.
10 or 12, yep.
Things, that are nice, short little blurbs that you can use for several months worth of people one in every bulletin.
Right, and they do highlight our mission giving throughout the annual conference.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the themes, I'll say real quick, one of the themes that I've been saying over and over again, Kristen, sometimes, is that, you know, we need to be giving people messages about this kind of what they're giving us, not just when we're asking them for money. That's why it's good to have these resources that are coming, they're going all different times of the year. When people say the church is only interested in my money, the reality is, I think what you're saying is, the only time we talk about money is when we're asking for money. We also need to be talking about the good that money does, which is why Dan and I are here to talk about, you're giving, the money does good things. And again, that's, I think, I was teaching Dan this morning because I'm going to steal that Malcolm story. I can't help it. It's just too good a story to talk about this young man who's living his life simply so he can be helping other people. And that happened because of Northcott. It happened because of the ministry of this conference sent ripples out. Who knows who those young men who are going to college? Who knows what they'll do? Who knows the lives they'll touch?
And thank you for being the choir that we could preach to this afternoon. And I just always, when I agree, preaching to the choir, but you know what choirs do? They practice the song and they sing it so other people can hear it. So you are our missionaries, you are our storytellers, and we thank you for spending your time here today. Keep pushing us to find creative ways to tell the story, and all of you, as I say, go back, share something you learned here today, talk about something you were impressed by today, and say thank you. Help us spread that good word. Let's have a word of prayer together as we close the day. Gracious God, thank you for the many blessings. Thank you for those things that we know about and the things we don't know about, where by our faithfulness we serve you and we serve one another. Lord, help us to keep focused. Help us to keep the main thing the main thing. We should seek first your kingdom, your righteousness, love you with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. If we can just stay focused on the good we can do and the good that you are seeking to do in and through us, we will be a great church. Thank you for the opportunity to be your people, to serve and to discern your will. Lord, make us faithful. Go with us from this place, watch over us, guide us, and help us in every way to honor and glorify you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.